Civilizations do not vanish overnight. They erode slowly, under pressures that build across generations. This is the story of how internal weaknesses, rather than external invasion, lead societies toward decline. Throughout history, the most enduring civilizations have collapsed not because of enemies at their gates, but because of fractures within their own systems. These fractures often begin small. A shift in climate patterns, a tax system that grows too complex, agricultural land that becomes less productive. Individually, these problems seem manageable, but together, over decades or centuries, they create conditions no society can sustain. Consider the role of environmental strain. When rainfall patterns change or soil fertility declines, food production falls. Populations that once thrived begin to struggle. Farmers move to cities seeking work. Urban centers swell beyond their capacity. The balance between resources and people shifts, and governments face choices with no good answers. Economic systems also contribute to decline. As civilizations grow, they require more resources to maintain themselves. Infrastructure must be repaired. Armies must be funded. Bureaucracies expand to manage increasing complexity. The cost of administration rises, but revenue does not always follow. Historians suggest that many societies reached a point where the expense of maintaining order exceeded what their economies could bear. Trade networks play a crucial role in this equation. When civilizations expand, they become dependent on resources from distant regions. These networks create prosperity, but also vulnerability. A disruption in one area ripples through the entire system. As maintenance costs rise, some routes become unprofitable. Communities that depended on these connections find themselves isolated. The economic web that once bound the civilization together begins to fray. Currency systems can also destabilize. Governments facing budget shortfalls sometimes debase their coins, reducing precious metal content while maintaining face value. This provides short-term relief, but creates long-term inflation. Merchants lose trust in the currency. Markets fragment. The standardized economy that facilitated growth becomes fragmented and inefficient. Debt compounds these economic strains. Governments borrow to cover deficits. Landowners mortgage properties. Small farmers fall into cycles of obligation they cannot escape. The proportion of economically independent citizens shrinks, weakening both the tax base and the number of people invested in preserving the system. Social imbalance accelerates these trends. When wealth concentrates among a small elite, the majority loses stake in the system's survival. Evidence indicates that inequality often preceded collapse in ancient societies. Those with power protect their interests. Those without power lose faith in institutions. The bonds that held communities together weaken. Administrative complexity creates its own problems. Large empires develop layers of governance. Messages travel slowly. Decisions require approval from distant authorities. Local officials lose flexibility to respond to crises. The system becomes rigid exactly when it needs to be adaptable. Research points to this institutional sclerosis as a recurring pattern across failed civilizations. Communication delays compound the problem. In large territories, orders from the capital may take weeks or months to reach distant provinces. By the time instructions arrive, circumstances have changed. Local governors must choose between following outdated directives or acting independently. Either choice undermines the coherence of central authority. Loss of adaptability may be the most critical factor. Societies that thrive are those that adjust to changing conditions, but established systems resist change. Traditional methods are defended, new approaches are dismissed. By the time the need for transformation becomes undeniable, the capacity to transform has already diminished. Educational systems can reinforce this rigidity. Elite training focuses on preserving traditional knowledge rather than generating new solutions. The brightest minds study ancient texts and established procedures. innovation becomes suspect. The intellectual tools available to solve problems become increasingly mismatched to the problems themselves. These processes unfold gradually. A generation experiences slightly less prosperity than the one before. Services deteriorate. Confidence in leadership erodes. People withdraw from civic participation. The cumulative effect is a society less capable of addressing challenges than it once was. Population movements respond to these pressures. When central authority weakens, people migrate toward more stable regions. They abandon cities that can no longer provide security or opportunity. Agricultural areas lose workers. Tax revenue declines further. What begins as individual rational choices becomes collective abandonment. Knowledge is lost in this process. Specialized crafts require apprenticeships lasting years. When economic disruption prevents masters from training students, techniques disappear within a generation. The ability to maintain certain structures or perform certain administrative functions simply vanishes. Future generations face problems their ancestors could have solved, but they cannot. The specific details vary across civilizations, but the underlying dynamics remain consistent. Whether in the ancient Mediterranean, Mesopotamia, or the Americas, we see similar patterns. Environmental stress combines with economic strain. Administrative systems grow unwieldy. Social cohesion fractures. Adaptability fades. Understanding these patterns requires acknowledging uncertainty. The historical record is incomplete. Scholars debate causes and timelines, yet the broad outline emerges reliably. Civilizations decline when internal systems can no longer support the complexity they have created. The lesson is not that collapse is inevitable. It is that maintaining a civilization requires constant attention to the health of its underlying systems. Environmental sustainability, economic fairness, institutional flexibility, social cohesion. These are not abstract ideals, but practical necessities. Decline happens when societies ignore these necessities for too long. When short-term solutions create long-term problems, the pressure builds silently across lifetimes until the weight becomes unbearable. No single event destroys a civilization. It is the accumulation of unresolved stresses, the compound effect of decisions deferred, and the gradual exhaustion of adaptive capacity. What we call collapse is often simply the final stage of a process that began long before anyone realized it had started. The historical evidence remains incomplete, but the pattern is clear. Civilizations fall not from a single blow,